It really is one of the oldest forms of magic. I am going to be using notes because I can't remember a whole talk these days. I don't have the memory. So anyway, dolls and effigies and images of people, animals, spirits and deities have been used for magical purposes since really ancient times. Image magic is prehistoric. Cave paintings might have been used for that. We don't obviously know for sure. Now, the earliest humanoid figure discovered is that of the Lion Man, and it's a figure made from walrus ivory. It's 40,000 years old, and it shows the figure of a body of a man and the head of a lion. You can see it on this bag that I bought at the British Museum at the time of the Living with Gods exhibition that was on there a little while ago. And the first thing in that exhibition, the first artifact in that exhibition was the Lion Man. And it was obviously really important to the people who made it, because it would have taken them a very long time to make, to carve with limited equipment. And it was placed in a very special place in a cave in Germany, where it was found in the 20th century. But as I said, it's 40,000 years old. The earliest known figure that is a completely human effigy is the Venus of Hohle Fels, and there are a lot of similar figures like the Venus of Hohle Fels that have been found all over Europe, and you're probably familiar with them. They show a female figure with a large belly and breasts, and might represent a goddess, might represent a matriarchal ancestor, might represent some important female figure for these people. By the time of the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, image magic was really important. One of the oldest spells recorded on a Mesopotamian clay tablet, it's described by Professor Owen Davis in this book, and it's a healing spell that uses a clay effigy of a dog, and it's a spell to heal dog bite. If you got bitten by a dog in ancient Mesopotamia, what you would do is you would go and get some clay from the riverbank or whatever, and you would rub it on the wound where you've been bitten by the dog, and then you would make an effigy of the dog that bit you, and you would leave it outside, perhaps on a wall in the sun, to dry. The idea being that as the sun dried up the dog, so your wound would dry up and heal. Now, that's obviously not current medical advice. I'd say go to A&E if you get bitten by a dog, and don't go rubbing some dirty old clay on it. But I do still believe that some sympathetic magic can help the healing process sometimes. Now, the ancient Egyptians also used effigy magic and image magic a great deal. For example, Egyptian children would play with paddle dolls, and they're called paddle dolls because they were carved and painted onto wooden shapes that were rather paddle shaped, so they had a head and a large body. They were dolls that children played with, but they were also protective. They were a form of protective magic. Sometimes they had the image of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, on them, who protected women in childbirth and children. They were thought to perhaps promote fertility and to be protective of infants in Egyptian times. You can see some of them on the Cumming Museum website if you want to, or in the Petrie Museum and in the Museum of Childhood in Bethnal Green. They have some of these paddle dolls. Now, in Greek and Roman times, kolossoi were little dolls that were used for spells. Now, these were actually often curses. They were named for a victim. If someone had annoyed you, perhaps, you might make one of these and take it to the cemetery, where you would ask the spirits of the restless dead to perhaps do something unpleasant to the person who'd wronged you. Now, this technique possibly travelled to Britain, and it's possibly where curse dolls that have been found in Britain, where the idea originated from. Now, in England, dolls have been used for curses, but they have also been used for healing magic and effigies as well. People would sometimes make a wax effigy of themselves if they were unwell and take it to a holy place, perhaps a temple or a shrine, and then leave the effigy there with the idea that the healing energy of the temple would help them via the effigy of themselves that they've made. Sometimes they just made an image of the part of the body had been hurt. If they broke their leg, perhaps they'd make an image of a leg in wax and leave that at a temple. You can find some of them in the Pitt Rivers Museum, or if you go online, you'll be able to see some images of that at the Pitt Rivers Museum. Now, magical dolls came to be called poppets in traditional English magic. It comes from the Middle English word spelt P-O-P-E-T, meaning a small child or doll. Now, since medieval times, that could mean a small human figure used in witchcraft as well as for children's toys. A poppet is also a name of endearment. It means a sweet little thing, perhaps a favourite child. And when I create a magical doll or a poppet, then I tend to think of it as a little child that perhaps I've made, although not one of flesh and blood. Now, I prefer not to use the term voodoo doll, and it's a common misconception that a principal element of voodoo, or the folk magic of hoodoo, is sticking pins into dolls as a curse. And that misconception really comes from 20th century books and films, often written by white Europeans or Americans, who didn't fully understand the traditions of that culture. The term poppet is older than voodoo doll and less associated with cultural appropriation if used by an English witch by me. So I do prefer to use the traditional term poppet. There are other terms as well, but poppet is one that I like to use. Now, how are poppets used in magic? The use of poppets is part of the tradition of sympathetic magic, following the idea that things that look like something can take their part or take their place in spells, which could be to help or to heal as well as to harm. Now, in simple terms, when you're casting a spell, you generally either create a mental picture of what you want to happen and put energy into that to make it so in the real world, or you create a physical object to represent your desired effect. And a magical doll is one of the best and most time-honoured ways of doing that. Modern witches can make magical dolls for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they're made because the person in question isn't present when you're casting a spell. And that could be just because they're in hospital and they've asked for healing energy to be sent to them, but they're not there. So you can make a poppet and visualise sending the healing energy into the poppet to go to them. But you could also make poppets to represent people who are present, including yourself, and I will often do that. Whether you want to attract love or wealth or happiness or joy or exam success, it can be easier to focus that wish onto a poppet that represents you than perhaps to focus that energy onto yourself. It can be easier to think of an external object as the focus of your spell. And it can complement your acts in the real world. So, obviously, if you want exam success, you do need to study as well as make a poppet. But I do think that it can help. Poppets can be made from all sorts of things. They can be made from cloth or clay or wax or wood or straw. Very early ones did tend to be made of clay. Wax is also very traditional, but you can make them from anything. You can make them from plasticine, paper, board, pretty much anything you like. Some modern poppets are made from mass-produced dolls or toys. And you can even buy voodoo doll kits. In general, I don't tend to think that anything like that works quite as well as something you've made from scratch for a whole lot of reasons. Now, firstly, the poppet should contain things that are connected to the person the spell is for, which a bought kit won't have. And secondly, you start to imbue the doll with purpose as soon as you make it. Your thoughts and feelings and intentions go into every act you perform while you're creating the doll. Puppets don't have to look realistic. They can be very stylized. Obviously, if you're skilled at sewing or knitting or painting or modeling, you can put those talents to good effect. But even if you have no artistic skill and are rubbish at making things, you can make a puppet. Now, a traditional spell to get a good night's sleep involves a magical doll. Now, in the past, it was thought that the night time was when people needed most protection. It was when ghosts and goblins and other supernatural nasties got up to most mischief. And magical objects were traditionally used for protection against that. And one of them could be made to guard over you when you sleep. There was one on display at the Spellbound exhibition at the Ashmolean Museum. This is the book that came with the exhibition, and here's my little bookmark I've got marking the place, which is also a kind of little magical protection puppet. But there is a picture of a little doll that was found up someone's chimney, and it's made out of a square of fabric, and it's got some herbs inside, and there were some psalms with it. Now, I often like to make poppets in that way as well. Here's one that I made myself, and the way that you make them is you get a square of fabric, which can just be plain white fabric, or you could use a square cut from one of your old pillowcases, or you can use a handkerchief, clean handkerchief. You open it up, put some herbs in the middle that would be good to help you sleep. I've used lavender. Then you bunch it up and tie some wool around the middle to kind of form a head with all the herbs in the middle. Tie it, leave some string to form a pair of arms. You can paint eyes and features on it, and then you enchant it. It's always important to enchant a puppet after you've made it, and the way that I've enchanted this little puppet was cast a circle, and then I said, I call on the elements and the powers of spirit to bring my puppet to magical life. May it watch over me while I sleep. From ghosties and ghoulies and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night, may my puppet protect me, so mote it be. And then open up the circle as usual and keep the puppet next to your bed while you sleep. Now, a more traditional way of making puppets is using cloth to make a sewn puppet. And I've got a little selection of puppets here in a variety of different colours, which are made in quite a popular way. Fabric puppets are less breakable than clay or wax puppets, and I tend to make them small so that I can carry them around with me in my pocket if I want to. For the body of the doll, you can upcycle an old garment worn by the person that the puppet will represent to give it a personal connection. This one here was made from one of my old t-shirts. You can reuse a favourite item of clothing that no longer fits or is worn out. Alternatively, you can use new fabric in a colour that represents your purpose in the spell. I like to use colour magic a lot. This one here is orange, which is good for communication. And I made this puppet when I was writing my book and stuffed it with herbs that would have a good association with that too, to sort of help me write, help with communication. Now, some people say that natural ingredients are best for any spell, and I would agree to some extent, but it isn't essential. A lot of felt that comes from fabric shops contains synthetic fibres, and unless you're intending to leave your poppet out in nature where, you know, animals might try to eat it or something like that, or get caught up with it, then I don't think it really matters. If you're going to keep it indoors or keep it in your pocket, then use whatever you have to hand. You cut out 2 identical doll shapes, and you can use a gingerbread cutter for that. That's what I used for mine. Or you can you can do a template on paper and then use that. And then you stuff them and fill them. There are 3 aspects really to what you put inside your poppet. Things that correspond to your desired magical outcome, things that link the doll to the person represented, and perhaps some extra filler. Now, things that relate to your desired magical outcome can be dried herbs, flowers, leaves. You can also put other symbolic things inside. Body parts. I don't actually mean anything gruesome. This little one here has a hawthorn berry inside it to represent my heart. You could put in seed pods to represent a womb. You could put in a walnut to represent the brain. Or you could just cut out shapes from paper or felt and put them inside. Now, things to link your poppet to the person represented. Hair is quite traditional. I often put a little bit of my own hair in poppets that represent me. If you're making a poppet for someone else, you could put a bit of their hair in. You know, do ask them before, don't just go and nick hair out of their hairbrush. You can also put in, again, little bits of fabric from their clothing, especially if you used the same thing to make the outside of the poppet. You can put a bit more inside. Now, of course, bodily fluids are also a strong connection to a person. And I don't really mean you're gonna like stab someone to get their blood, but if you happen to prick your finger when you're making a poppet, then you can put a little bit of that into your poppet. Obviously, think about health and safety, but actually, when I was making this little poppet, I did prick my finger and I did put a tiny little bit of blood inside the poppet. Maybe that's a bit gruesome. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. The neutral fillers, well, they're really just to give it a bit of extra shape. Use as little neutral filler as you can, I would say, because it's not really adding much to the magic. You don't have to be good at sewing to sew up the outside. You can just do a running stitch around the edge. If you feel competent, you can use a blanket stitch around the edge. Or if you really are no good at sewing, you can glue them or you can staple them around the outside. It's a good idea to put eyes on the poppet because the eyes are the window to the soul. You can also put other features on the outside. And you can put other things. This little one has a little heart charm on it. So you can decorate the outside of the poppet as much as you like. Now, that is how to make the poppet, but you haven't really brought the poppet to magical life until you've enchanted it. And for that, you need to do a bit of a ritual. Without the ritual, it really is just a doll, even though it's imbued with a lot of symbolism and full of correspondences. Now, the easiest way to name your poppet magically is to cast a circle and then pick up the poppet and name it 3 times. You can say, I name you XXX. You then blow onto the poppet and visualise breathing life into it. Now, you can name your poppet for the person, so I might name a poppet after me, or you can name the poppet for the purpose that it's going to have. So it could be, my name is Lucya, so I could name my poppet Lucya's good luck or Lucya's health or something like that. So it doesn't have to be precisely the same name as the person. Now, once you've made your puppet, you need to take care of it. Where you keep it will probably depend on its purpose. So you could keep it with your CV if you're applying for jobs, keep it in the bedroom if it's anything associated with sleep or love or whatever. If you don't want to leave it on display, perhaps because there are prying eyes in your house, you could make a special box to keep it in. Or, as it's a small puppet, you can keep it with you at all times. You can keep it in your bag or your pocket. Now, if your puppet has done everything you want and you want to decommission it, the way to do that is kind of to do the reverse order of casting it, of creating it. So you will cast a circle and thank your puppet for the work it has done. Say, I thank you, name your puppet. Your work is done. Then pass your athame or scissors over the puppet and visualize cutting any energetic ties that connect it to the person it represents. Say, I cut the ties that connect you to whoever. Then I unname you. That's quite important, that you completely reverse the process. So you then take the puppet to pieces very slowly. You can unpick the threads very, very carefully in the reverse order to how you created it. And then you can recycle the bits. Now, pins and thorns. In popular culture, puppets and pins kind of go together. However, just because you stuck a pin into a puppet doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it for ill-wishing or to harm someone. I mean, I'll come back to this little puppet here. There's a little safety pin in it, connecting a heart charm to it, and that is most certainly not meant to harm anyone. That is a puppet to... This little one is actually a puppet I made to remember my father who passed away, and I made it out of one of his old ties, and I put a little heart on it to remember that I love my father. It's a memorial puppet. So that is one example of a pin not being used to harm. You could also think of the pin as being a mini athame directing energy. So you could put a pin to the puppet for healing. I want this particular area to be healed. So there are, and you can think of many different ways in which you might want to direct energy with a pin, although sometimes sticking a pin into a puppet to harm someone is what has been done. I'm not going to deny that. Now, I'm going to be slightly moving on to curses here because people do think of puppets as being associated with curses. Now, I would say if you are intending to use a puppet to curse anyone, think very, very carefully before you do so. Some people believe that if you do a spell, it will rebound on you. Others don't believe that. But even so, I would say it isn't necessarily ethical if your first course of action is to say, okay, so-and-so has really pissed me off, so I'm going to stick a pin in them. If they're in pain, it isn't necessarily going to make them well disposed to anyone, even if there's no magical rebound. You might find another way of getting what you want better. But if you really, really are intent on casting a curse, then there are many different ways in which you can do it. And they can involve puppets. Now, the first example I would say is a frozen puppet. If someone is behaving in a bit of an antisocial way and you want to freeze them so that they can't act in that way anymore, you could make a puppet and put it in the back of your freezer. Say, I freeze your actions, you are stopped. To unfreeze them, take the puppet out of the freezer and say, I release you from the ice. Binding is a traditional way of preventing someone from acting in a certain way, perhaps if they're being antisocial or acting in a way that would harm themselves. You can make a puppet to represent them and then tie that puppet with string or cord 3 or 9 times is traditional. with each turn of the cord, you can say, I bind you, so-and-so. I restrain you from doing such actions. You are bound until I release the cord. Tie the ends together with 3 or 9 knots. To unbind them, undo the knots and unwrap the cord, saying, I release you from your binding, name them. I free you to act as you will. You are unbound. Disempowering. Now, making a puppet representing a caricature of a person can be something that you could do. Caricatures should look harmless and humorous. Laughter is a great way of removing our fear of things and rendering the things we laugh at harmless and powerless. Deliberately laugh at the puppet and say, you're a joke. You are harmless. I laugh at you. You have no power over me. You can use a puppet to prick a person's conscience. Perhaps they've taken something from you that you want returned and haven't done so yet, even though you keep asking them. What you could do is make a puppet of the person and lightly prick it with a pin. Say, I prick your conscience. May you feel the stings of remorse until you return my item to me, or undo whatever you have done and put it right. Now, banishing. Now, generally speaking, if you want someone to leave you alone, it's probably best to tell them to leave you alone. But perhaps you tried that and it hasn't worked. What you could do is create a puppet of a person and then write a little miniature letter on them, offering them perhaps a job or something a long way away to attract their attention a long way away from you, and pin that to the puppet. If that doesn't work, you could actually physically send the puppet a long way away. You could, the traditional way was to throw it in a fast flowing river. And apparently quite a lot of puppets have been found in riverbeds, and someone's taken the puppet there and thrown it away, hoping the river will carry it off. Now, nowadays that might be considered pollution, but you could perhaps leave the puppet on a train going a long way away, or on a bus going a long way away, or if you're travelling somewhere, take the puppet with you and leave it there. Now, finally, I'm going to talk about killing curses. Now, I'm really not recommending anybody does a killing curse. Absolutely not. But for purely information purposes, here's a description of one from a confession under examination of Elizabeth Sowens, alias Demnike, in the 17th century Pendle witch trials in Lancashire, and that's taken from A Discovery of Witches by Thomas Potts. And this is what Elizabeth Demdike apparently said on trial. This examineth confesseth and saith that the speediest way to take a man's life by witchcraft is to make a picture of clay, like unto the shape of the person whom they mean to kill, and dry it thoroughly. And when they would have them to be ill in any one place more than another, then take a thorn or pin and prick it in that part of the picture you would have to be ill. And when you had of any part of the body to consume away, then take that part of the picture and burn it. And when they would have the whole of the body consume away, then take the remnants of said picture and burn it. And thereupon, by that means, the body will die. Well, as I said right at the start, most modern witches use puppets for healing or for sympathetic magic to help people rather than to harm people, but I don't think that any talk about puppets is complete without a little bit of a talk about curses. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this talk. If you want to read my blog, you can find it at www.badwitch.co.uk, and if you do want to read my book, you can order it from the Treadwell's website. They do always have copies of my book in stock, and I do give talks and workshops there as well. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this talk, and well, good luck with whatever magic you do.